the welcome to the Coaching for Impact webinar this afternoon. My name's Jackie Reynolds. I'm Research Impact Manager and Associate Professor at the University of Staffordshire. And this afternoon's session is, the focus of this afternoon's session is on coaching for mid-career researchers. There's an increasing focus on the pressures and expectations faced by mid-career researchers. A report published last year, commissioned by Eastern Arc and undertaken by Women in Academia Support Network, made clear that the barriers faced by mid-career researchers are pervasive and entangled in their complexity, and that an academic's mid-career is a pinch point when they face a competing number of additional roles, responsibilities, and activities. And the problems include lack of training and mentoring and overall a lack of good career support. Now, today, we're going to be hearing from three absolutely fantastic speakers who will be sharing with us some of their experiences of supporting mid-career researchers through coaching-informed approaches. So first of all, we're going to be hearing from Dr Ged Hall, who is co-organiser of these Coaching for Impact webinars. And he's an academic development consultant and team leader for the researcher development and culture team at the University of Leeds. Then we're going to be hearing from Dr Katy Mahoney, who is a professional researcher coach with over 2 decades of experience supporting researchers in university settings. She has coached and trained researchers across 7 continents and has developed a flagship researcher coaching programme. Our third speaker will need no introduction to many of you. It's Saskia Walcott, and she is widely recognised as one of the UK's eminent research impact practitioners. And she's a trailblazer who has been leading the way in the impact space since 2012 and is now CEO of Walcott Communications, a specialist research impact consultancy that works in the UK, Europe, Southeast Asia and Australia. So at a rough calculation, our speakers today offer 60 to 70 years of combined experience of supporting impact. And so without further ado, I will hand us over to Ged to get us started. Over to you, Ged.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jackie. And blimey, 70 years. This better be good, I guess, with that in mind.
No pressure.
So yeah, firstly, thanks to Jackie for organising this series. It's really down to her inspiration in terms of talking about this topic, and this is now the 4th, so lots of people are interested in it, and also thanks for inviting me back to talk, because I talked in the first one. So obviously I wasn't too bad that time, and hopefully we'll manage to keep that going. I'm going to move my Zoom has managed to put things in a stupid place, but in this talk, I'm going to describe my experiences of coaching mid-career academics and try to draw out some reflections that may help you to shape your practice in that space. But before I dive into that, I just wanted to give a quick plug for the Research Culture Uncovered podcast. So the QR code takes you to our homepage. But obviously you can also listen via all the major platforms. Now, the reason for saying this is I've published an episode on my own coaching practice, and we also have a range of playlists for different aspects of research culture, including research impact, for those of you who are interested in that. And hopefully Jackie's now posted the links to that episode and the playlists in the chat, and also our LinkedIn and email contacts. So really, for the rest of the 15 minutes, I'm going to try and give you a flavour for what makes a good impact coach by drawing on the work of Pamela McLean in her book, Self as Coach, Self as Leader. And I'm going to describe 3 real vignettes. And I notice there's quite a few people from Leeds here, so I'm going to keep it kind of gender neutral in all those descriptions so that people can't be trying to kind of go, oh, I wonder who that might be. Just to kind of keep it nice and safe, because obviously I'm drawing on real experiences here. All of those people talking about in those 3 vignettes, all mid-career, and hopefully through those vignettes, some of the concepts from Pamela McLean's book will become more concrete for you. And finally, I'd like to leave with some reflections that I hope might help to, as I said, shape your coaching practice. So, McLean's book suggests that a developmental coach needs to focus on 6 areas. The first is presence. It has 3 components. Presence to yourself. So that's when you're coaching. Are you able to be attentive to your inner rumbling and what's affecting you, and to be able to move that out of the way so that you can focus on your coachee and be present with them and all the subtle cues that they are giving you in terms of how that coaching is going. And finally, the third element of presence is, are you clear about the context that that person is sitting within and can't be divorced from? The second is empathy, which is about being able to understand what it is like to walk in that person's shoes, but it's definitely not about wearing them. So this balance prevents you from being overwhelmed by the person's emotions and situations, and guards against rescuing them. Now, to be good at this, you need to be good at self-care. And finally, in this domain, you also need to have that wide-angled empathy, which is really about that presence in the context they're sitting in. So do you have empathy for the kind of the range of stakeholders that they may be working with and being part of? So that might be even family as well. So that's really important. And obviously we're all impact interested here in this webinar. So stakeholder analysis and being clear about that and systems thinking is really important in that context. The third is feelings. Here, a coach needs to be able to access nuances in feelings and emotions that are on a scale that is at least equivalent to your coachee. So different cultures have different ways of talking about feelings. So for instance, in Mandarin, there are 5 different ways of describing anger. So in HE, our hugely multicultural environment gives us lots of opportunities for us as coaches to actually expand our concept of emotions, and that makes us better able to tune into our coachees' emotions. The fourth are boundaries and systems. So we have to be clear as a coach where and how we are drawing our boundaries. Too rigid and we won't develop a rapport with our coachee, and too diffuse and we are tempted to do things like fix them or make them feel better. And I put fix in inverted commas. And this is also where systems thinking comes in. And it's important because the coachee cannot be outside of the system they are part of. Essentially, if they were, that they can often do the kind of blaming sort of situation, and that if you were to allow that as a coach, it kind of says, it's a little bit emasculating of the coachee, that they can't interact with their environment and it's all the system's fault. And really, that's also one of the key concepts in impact planning. If we've got to be able to think about what level of influence and control we have over the system that we're trying to change. The fifth is embodiment. So every action starts within our body. Sensations are felt and then interpreted by the brain. So this is about developing our own felt sense of self to gain a better understanding of the non-verbal messages from our coachees. Now, I struggle with this, and that's definitely an area I'm trying to work on. The final element is courage, and that's both physical, moral, and psychological in its components. So this helps us to raise issues that may unlock a way forward, but may initially generate resistance with our coachees. And of course, all of these dimensions sit in our inner landscape, all the experiences we've had, and our own stage of development as a coach and as a person. Again, the key premise of the book is that we have to make all of that conscious so that we can further develop our practice in those 6 domains. So why is this important really in coaching mid-career academics? Well, as Jackie said, they're probably the people who were, she's kind of stolen my thunder here. I definitely feel that they are the ones that are probably in the HE system who are more under pressure than almost anyone else. They're leading research. They've probably been a PI for some time. They may already have a reasonable sized research group and the staff challenges that that comes with, both recruiting and managing those people. And of course, they'll be crucial in shaping a sustainable and better research culture in the future as their leadership responsibilities grow. And hopefully they aren't swamped by that as they are growing. And finally, when we're working with them to think about research impact, the systems that they're hoping to change face similar complex challenges. So when they move into those systems, that can bring additional pressures too. And again, if they're too empathetic, they risk that empathy contagion, essentially. They may start to feel like they need to rescue people, and that's not what they should be doing either. So moving on to the vignettes, and hopefully these will be interesting for you. So the first vignette was an associate professor at Leeds, and their appointment was joint between two schools, one in the STEM area and one in the other and the other one in the social sciences area. Most of their education and early postdoctoral phase had been in Australia, so they were kind of impact aware because of what's going on in that HE system. But they have been in the UK since 2015. Now, this early work was mostly in the STEM area, so the STEM school felt more like their disciplinary home. They are impact motivated, but not exclusively, because they enjoy curiosity-led work. And they felt that their motivation for impact would have greater satisfaction through pathways in the social sciences school, which really generated that concern that I've labeled imposter syndrome, because they didn't really feel like an expert in that social sciences space. So what did we talk about? Well, we really took a big step back and talked about their values a lot in their early sessions. And this was really to help them ground them in who they are, so that internal landscape that McLean's book talks about. And also it was to make sure that my much bigger impact motivation, I'm very impact motivated, was able to be pushed out of the way. It's not my values that are important in the coaching space, although it is a negotiation between the two. But to prevent that bias in our work, if we're talking about values, this is that person's career and where they want to go next, and it's not my view that's important. So this enabled us to work on their ideas for a future research strategy that respected all of those values. And it also enabled a conversation around how they use their current activities, especially in the impact space, to help co-develop research questions. We also worked on ways that they could develop a niche through that research strategy that brokered the STEM and social sciences expertise across the two sets of colleagues in the two schools. Now, we had to tap into the courage and wide angle domains to enable that, and also to enable them to feel at home in that niche. The final aspect about mentors came out in our discussions about research strategy. So they had a mentor from each of the two schools, and there was a boundary issue going on because the mentoring appeared to be competitive and seemed to be focused on making the coachee choose one school to be their home or the other to be their home. Now, although this sounds bad, it's actually quite normal and understandable, because most academics would rank their loyalty in this order: to their discipline, to their current colleagues and school that they work in now, and then finally to the university they work in now. And we've got to be aware of that when we're representing the university at the centre, like I do. So there is a natural bias towards keeping their discipline healthy. And so they were both mentors were responding to that desire by seeking to refresh the talent in their home discipline with a well-regarded colleague, the coachee in this respect. So realizing that helped them in two ways. It helped to reinforce their view of themselves as an expert in both disciplines, and it increased their agency in choosing what advice to take and what advice to adapt or even ignore through that mentoring. The second vignette was a professor. So this was we started the coaching around 3 years after they were promoted to the professorship. Professorship. Their progression had been pretty fast, as well as their PhD had only been 11 years prior to that. So 11 years through all the senior lecturer kind of grades. Now, they were strongly impact motivated, kind of probably on a level with kind of my impact motivations, because of a real values-led desire to change policy outcomes in the area in which they worked. So due to that, they've done lots of engagement work, and actually the amount of that work seemed to be on an almost exponential trajectory. And over the last year or two, it had predominantly come from external stakeholders requesting engagement rather than the person chasing that engagement. So what did we talk about? So the way they described their engagement opportunities, it felt like they had an almost instinctive yes response. So we explored if that response, that instinct was true, and whether it was true just generally outside of impact spaces. So did it matter where the request was come from, and were they almost wired to say yes? So this was really fully in that internal landscape that we're talking about, because we looked at requests both in their professional and personal lives. And there were lots of historic and current reasons for developing that instinct. And that really came from, the book describes it as empathy contagion, which is actually taking on the needs of others just a little too much. With this realization, they felt more comfortable with working out, where we moved in the coaching next, how to say no. So we worked on assessment criteria for opportunities. And once we had some draft criteria, we tested them on the opportunities that had come in the previous year, because the person already had a sense of what had worked out for them and what hadn't, in terms of what had been beneficial for them. And therefore, they were a great test case. And finally, we worked on how to bring their research and impact activities closer together to find time efficiencies and to ensure they were supportive of each other. Now, the final vignette was actually a group. So I offer my coaching both to individuals and groups, as long as they're, in a shared impact interest, if you will. Let's put it that way. So this was actually a group where there was an established professor, 2 associate profs, and some research staff. And they were all working on a program of research that actually involved numerous projects. So there were some large and long, and some that were much shorter and had much less resource. The primary concern that they expressed was around the evaluation of impact. I mean, let's face it, who doesn't? If you asked 100 people who were doing impact as researchers, or those of us supporting those researchers, what do you want to know more about? The top answer will be evaluation, no matter how many times you ask that question. So that's not surprising, and really they were hoping that one day it might be a case study for the next research excellence framework. So as a group, that was actually fairly easy thing to talk about. Obviously we spent quite a while talking about a whole range of different evaluation frameworks and models that we had seen being used by other researchers in a similar space. Could they apply that? So also as a group, we talked about those motivations and potentially the additional burden that came from implementing those ideas. So additional burden for them and maybe even their stakeholders that they were working with. These discussions were usually enthusiastic, but at times this was stopped with a negative verbal and non-verbal messages, which mainly came from the prof. So I therefore initiated an individual conversation with the prof, and just to explore the way they were phrasing and trying to raise that issue about how their demeanor was putting barriers in the minds of the other people in the group. And we also opened out the discussion into that kind of wider discussion about their leadership behaviors. Now, there were actually understandable reasons for some of this negativity, a lot of which was stemming from the person actually not being that well at the time. So that that opening out allowed them space where we could meet individually and I could support them, but I could also meet with the group without them, so that so I could support them without that kind of tension going on. I don't want tension within the group, but just that tension for different kind of reasons for being coached that was going on. And it also allowed the research leader to kind of think about how delegation could happen, just to try and reduce the impact on them, especially when they didn't have the usual personal resources that they normally have. So what were my reflections from these vignettes? And I'll try and situate these as much as I can within Pamela McLean's work. So the first is the obvious one, that you can't just coach about a topic, even when you brand it that way. So I brand mine as impact coaching. You always have to work with the whole person or the whole group, if it is a group, and the systems that they're in. The second is, if we want to provide this developmental coaching, and my first reflection says that I do, then I have to know myself well enough to be able to understand others. So I need to be clear about where my comfort zone is and how I'll expand it if that's necessary, and it usually is. The third is understanding my values and how they influence my ethical compass in interactions with those people and their system and wider system that external stakeholders bring in. And the fourth is that system. Because I'm an internal coach, I coach everybody at my own institute, not everybody at my own institution, but the people I coach are from my own institution. I have to be clear and transparent about when I'm integral to the system and when I'm legitimately beyond it, so that I can be much more objective, etc. Now, because I don't work in our research service, so we call it Research Innovation Services, because I don't sit in that department, which is responsible for the ref results, it does allow me that being able to step outside of that system to some extent, but not completely. Courage was really important in the third vignette. I still don't know if I'd be able to do that separation of the prof from the group if the person was more bullish and more, let's say, confrontational in the way they are. But I need to work out how I'll do that, because that situation is not one I can control never happening. The final thought for me is supervision. So that's a concept that comes from counseling and therapeutic settings. So here I'm thinking about it in ways that who will help me to develop in the ways I need to develop to carry on being good and hopefully being better at coaching just generally. Now, I'd really encourage you to dive into McLean's book. It's quite short, which is helpful. But it's got loads of really great coaching questions across all those domains. And I've found those really helpful in my own development. And I hope if you dive into it, they can help navigate you towards the development style of coaching. And finally, I hope this short presentation has given you some thoughts to ponder, even if you don't read her book. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jed. That was I love that presentation. That was really so reflective, and the vignettes sort of brought it to life. The issues talking about, you know, with specific sort of individuals really helps to kind of bring that to life. So thank you for that, and that's definitely another one to add to my reading list, most definitely. So thanks again, and I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Katy Mahoney. Katy. Or you're still on mute just now, Katy.
Sorry, how many years have passed COVID and still happens?
We all do it.
Try again. Thank you, Jed. And I was just saying thank you, Jed, for that really informative presentation. And I've also been kind of taking notes there and thinking about how your practice there also informs the practice that I have as well. So Jed talked about the coaching for impact, or impact coaching. And I'm going to flip it on its head and talk to you about the impact of a coaching program that I ran for University of Surrey from 22 to 23, supporting a cohort of mid-career researchers. So I'm going to share the program, and I'm also going to share the impact that program had on those who were involved. And then at the end of this, the presentation, also share another program that I'm now involved with, and how they've managed to link that to research culture as well. So that's my plan. So the program of coaching that I worked with at the University of Surrey, an academic approached me and asked, would I be able to support his mid-career researchers who, as Jed had already said, and as Jackie's talked about, they're mid-career researchers who often felt that they were kind of missed out. They weren't able to access the early career research sort of support. They'd been through the PGR support program, they've been through the postdoc support program, and suddenly they're now into their mid-career thinking about professorship, and there was a lack of support available for his staff, and so he wanted to offer a program of support for those researchers. So the program itself ran, as I said, between June 22 and February 23, and it supported a cohort of 8 mid-career researchers from within the psychology department at the University of Surrey. Interestingly, initially the program was going to be a series of action learning sets. But after discussing that program with the people who were going to get involved, what they really wanted was something very unique and individual to them. They felt that this wasn't something that was going to help them in terms of a group. They wanted that bespoke and unique support. So what the program was kind of morphed into was 5 one-hour individual coaching sessions per academic, which meant that they had that bespoke support, but also meant that they were still part of a cohort, so they knew who else had been on that program as well. There was an expectation that they would then go away and do some kind of reflective activity for around about an hour and a half plus, and implement any actions that they agreed to as a result of that coaching session. The coachees also committed to writing reflective action plans, but also summaries of their actions that they would then bring to each coaching session, so that they were able to demonstrate the impact of the coaching from session to session, but also able to reflect on their progress as well. And we used the researcher development framework to kind of pull out areas that they thought might be helpful in terms of their career development. So the program itself, in terms of its goals and how it was developed, really was to support those researchers to feel empowered to really feel that they were valued by their community, but also to help them to think about some of the coaching skills that they were experiencing that they could then go on and support others with as well. And what I found was, by the end of the program, many of those mid-career researchers were able to use almost self-coaching techniques on themselves, but also had said that they were now using a coaching mentality with perhaps some of their PhD students as well. So we had the kind of the impact of the coaching, but also the impact of the coaching experience then onto junior researchers as well. As we go through this presentation, I've just picked out some small statements and from the feedback that I received from those mid-career researchers and mapped it back through to the researcher development framework. And you can see there on the screen, we've got before the coaching, I was constantly stressed and firefighting in my day-to-day job. Rather than thinking and behaving strategically and purposefully, coaching has allowed me to clearly see a pathway to successful career development. Coaching empowered me to think about how to take that path, which sits really nicely within the domain C of the researcher development framework. And again, sits nicely within that research strategy element. And what we found was that those mid-career researchers were able to kind of track, well, I was here, but actually I would really like to be here. Many of those mid-career researchers were thinking about their professorship, thinking about what they'd need to do in order to put forward their applications. And using the researcher development framework was a really helpful way to help them to think about their next steps within their career. And often, we'd be looking at many of the phases of the researcher development framework, thinking sort of phase 3, and thinking about the next steps moving into phase 4 and perhaps even phase 5 as well. Thinking about the next steps, or the next kind of aspect of the career of the coaching, was its impact on career development for the researchers that were part of that program. Many felt that they'd increased in their confidence, were able to make better decisions, and this then impacted on their work practice as well. Many pulled out this idea of being strategic, feeling more confident in being strategic, and thinking about the goals that they wanted to achieve in their career. And they also recognized some of the problems that they were facing and some of the sort of bad practice that they'd picked up in avoiding different aspects of their job, but also then being able to think about how they could then go on and overcome some of those challenges. And I think one of the great, I think an amazing impact of that coaching was, as a result of this program, I've submitted more papers. I've gained more confidence in my decision. I've changed my work practices. It helps me with my aim to provide clear leadership for my team and focus on my long-term career goals. I've changed my work practices, particularly my approach to problem solving, which again sits really nicely within domain D of the researcher development framework and domain A as well. So really thinking about engagement and influence. Submitting more papers sits really nicely in that communication and dissemination of research, and thinking about leadership and their impact on teams as well. And again, really thinking about how we can support researchers through coaching to move from one phase to another. And again, those researchers who were part of this program, recognizing that they were perhaps at phase 3, but they really wanted to move towards phase 4 in their team working, but also in their influence and their leadership as well. Again, thinking about taking responsibility for different areas of their career, but also perhaps different areas within the department, and then thinking about how they might change their leadership style. One of the researchers that I was working with was really struggling with the way that their team was reacting to that particular leadership style. And as a result of the coaching, they were able to practice, but also play with different leadership styles, and then come back and have coaching conversations with me and kind of, again, adapt and adopt different methods and different approaches, and then have that safe space to come back and reflect and see what had gone well, but also perhaps what they'd do differently as well. And again, just to kind of reiterate, confidence in terms of publications, really helping those researchers who were keen to submit more papers, but also to recognise that publication and dissemination sat nicely within the researcher development framework as well. The impact on personal growth and productivity as a result of the coaching program was really lovely to see, and to see those researchers grow as a result of the coaching. What they really began to recognise was that the coaching gave them a separate space to come and explore what was going on in their lives, but also then to pull together a plan and actually do something with that plan as well. And coming back to what Ged was saying earlier on, recognizing that when you are coaching someone, the impact that you have is not just on their work, but it can be on their whole lives, and you do end up coaching the whole person. Often people come to me and say, I need help with time management, and I always say it's never about time management, but okay, we can start coaching with time management, but the impact will be something much, much bigger. And often those coachees recognize that it wasn't time management that they had problems with, it was other things. And once we'd resolved the other things, then time management was the kind of the present that dropped out of the bottom. The other benefit to the coaching program and the impact that it had on personal growth and productivity was that I was very external to the university. So I wasn't there to make judgments about the university. I wasn't there to give advice about where to go and get support. I was there to coach the whole person, which meant that they really were able to kind of explore things that perhaps an internal coach they may well have felt that they couldn't share for fear that potentially that person might be on a panel somewhere in the future. So being very, very external meant that the impact of the coaching was I think slightly greater than perhaps an internal coach in those situations. So again, just looking at those impacts there, we've got the ability to think about strategies for productivity and time management, but also thinking about the impact that had on work-life balance and managing day-to-day stress. And a lovely quote from a researcher there saying that as a result of coaching, it put me in a stronger position to take on my new challenges at work without feeling overwhelmed. And I generally felt calmer too, which is a good thing both for my work and home life. And again, that sits really nicely in domain B of the researcher development framework when we talk about self-management and time management, work-life balance. So again, just allowing those researchers to think about the aspects of their job, which they may feel they are completely alone with, but by sharing the research development framework, it gave them a language that they could use to say, that's exactly where I am. I don't want to be there. I want to be here. So it was a great tool for coaching because it helped people to recognize where they want to be in the future. And that was something that those who came on the program were keen to do. So in terms of the impact of that coaching program on their personal effectiveness, I've already said that often people say, I just need to be better at time management. And it's never really just about time management. We've all got diaries and calendars, and it's not about managing time. It's often about managing everything else. And so the researchers were able to say, actually, if I was more assertive, I would be able to say no to things. If I was more confident, I would have a better balance. I would be able to take control of my workload in a better way. So as a result of the coaching, the coachees were saying that things like these sessions help me feel stronger in taking on new challenges, help me to prepare for an interview or for to consider new career possibilities. And again, that real recognition that coaching had allowed people to spend a moment just to pause and to reflect and recognize what they were good at. And in some cases, to remind those researchers of what they were good at, because in some cases they were beginning to feel so overwhelmed that they really were just looking from one meeting to the next and had never had or weren't able to take time to really think about what might happen next. And that personal effectiveness, again, it sits really nicely within domain B, thinking about self-confidence, but also thinking about career management and continued professional development. A flag here just for the researcher development framework. It's about to be refreshed and renewed, but the mid-career researchers and the impact of the mid-career or research careers is now being recognised more strongly. And we really want to make sure that they're not seen as the forgotten middle, that they are recognised as it's a legitimate kind of part of a research career. So all of these domain descriptors have been reviewed, and also we really want to make sure that the coaching approach is something that can really benefit researchers not just to be coached, but also to use a coaching approach in their management styles as well. So just as a summary then of the impact of that program, those researchers who were involved felt that they had a strengthened direction for their career, but also a better idea of the purpose. And in some cases, I had researchers who recognized that although they loved their research career, they also had plans that they wanted to spin out, take on consultancy, and the coaching really gave them that opportunity to really think about that as an opportunity and take some proactive steps in exploring what that might look like. There was also that key one there of increased publication productivity and strategic mindsets. All of the researchers who were involved in that program had said they wanted to write papers. And in many of those cases, that was an underlying reoccurring theme. So although we might be talking about career development or the opportunity for spin out or managing teaching loads, often the idea of having some kind of accountability and some way of sort of coming back and saying, I've done this, that was a real drive to help people get those publications over the line. And as you can see there, we've got the idea that this program gave them more or new confidence to provide clear leadership, and it was able to help them with their focus on their long-term goals. So as I promised, an overview there of the researcher coaching program at the University of Surrey. And this is a word cloud of the review and of the feedback that we had from the program. As you can see there, positive, confidence, support, leadership, enlightening, non-judgmental, all real positive impacts of that research coaching program for those mid-career researchers. And I just wanted to finish by giving you a heads up of what next for the mid-career researchers and how I continue to coach mid-career researchers. Just last month, the LSE has commissioned some more coaching, and this has come through a program aligned to their Research for World strategy, and has also been funded by research culture money. So they've recognized that coaching can have a positive impact on research culture, and they've tapped into that funding to offer that to 20 mid-career researchers over the next 3-4 months. It was a competitive process. Applicants had to submit an application explaining why they wanted coaching and the impact that they were hoping that coaching would have on their career, but also on the university and the culture that they are involved with. So it was a real opportunity for the university to demonstrate a commitment to creating a positive research culture, but also a real opportunity for researchers who wanted to make the next step in their career to apply for that coaching program. So I feel like I've rattled through quite a lot of slides there and talked at you, but I'm welcome to pick up questions after the final presentation from Saskia. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Katy. It's another fabulous presentation, and I love the fact that it's coming through in both of the presentations that we've had so far. This kind of really holistic approach to coaching in the way that it sort of extends far beyond just talking about people's impact. But also, I love the way that you talked about people using these coaching informed approaches, having experienced coaching themselves and getting so much benefit from it, being able to kind of use that in their work as well with PGR students and others. That's fabulous. Really, really interesting. Thank you. As we said, there will be time for questions at the end. If you've got a question burning in your head now and you don't want to forget it, then do feel free to pop it in the chat and we can come back to it at the end. But first of all, we're going to hear from our third and final speaker, which is Saskia Walcott. I'll hand over to you, Saskia.
Thank you very much, Jackie. And thank you, Katy and Jed. It was really fascinating listening to your talks, and actually great because it sort of, they very nicely bring us to what I want to talk about. So I don't have a presentation, so I will be talking for the next sort of 10-15 minutes. And I think that it's, just sort of full disclosure from my part, I ummed and ahed about whether I wanted to even take part in the Coaching for Impact webinar, because it's taken, I don't necessarily consider myself a coach. I don't have coaching qualifications. But I spoke to Jackie, and when I reflected on it, I'd known for a long time the conversations that I've been having really for many years now, haven't just been coaching for impact, but really much broader coaching conversations. And I think there were some really great key terms that came up in both Jed's presentation and also Katy's that really resonated with me. So when Jed said you can't just coach about the topic, even if it's branded that way, that's absolutely right. In so many conversations that I have where I have been brought in to do sessions with people on a one-to-one basis about their impact, so very often that very quickly becomes a much bigger conversation about other aspects of their life. And I think it took me, I was always initially quite surprised by that. And it took me quite a while to sort of understand that what I was doing almost instinctively with them was coaching. And it's been quite refreshing and actually quite reassuring for me as I've done a bit of research in preparation for this, to realize that actually instinctively some of the sort of the skills needed for coaching, the techniques used in coaching, are things that I instinctively would do, but there's still plenty of space for improvement. And listening to Katy and Jed, that has been really quite inspirational. So thank you. In terms of what I'd like to talk about is more of bringing my experience of working with specifically female mid-career researchers and increasingly also women of colour. And I'm not going to presume to present you with sort of anything I would call solutions about this. Actually, what I'd like to do is just to highlight this as an experience, and I think very much open it up then for something for this group to take away and think about and reflect upon in terms of the coaching that you might do and who you are doing it with. And very much, I think, coming at it from that sort of whole person perspective that has come up in the previous two discussions. So, I accept entirely that coaching should be a neutral exercise. And, if done well, it's about open listening, being attentive, asking open questions, giving space to others. All of those should be neutral skills that you can perform with anybody. But the truth of the matter is that we all bring ourselves to the party, and our own life experiences and preconceptions are brought into the room with us. Even if we have done the work to think about our biases, to think about the baggage that we bring in, it's often still there. And actually being aware of that is really important, which is something that Jed mentioned in his talk about understanding the presence of yourself and what you bring into the room and how much of that you can put aside. And I think when you are coaching for impact, there's an expectation from the people that you are working with that you are the expert in the room. So there is an expectation that you will be, you will also be giving them some direction, that you are there to offer advice and make suggestions. So it's not necessarily coaching in its purest sense, because you as the research impact manager, whatever your title might be in the room, there is an expectation that you will help them advance that their research impact, and will be providing an element of sort of direction to them as part of that. So I think it's an interesting place to be, because you will often find yourself, or I have often found myself, should I say, both having very very sort of deep personal conversations with people, and then sort of also then moving that into a space where suddenly I'm also sort of an expert in trying to provide advice as well. So I have found that at times a little bit difficult to negotiate. So setting that aside, I'm going to give you a bit of my sort of experiences, and I will start back into the sort of the annals of time. As Jackie pointed out, we have many years of experience between us, and I have been working with academic researchers now for quite some time. And if I think back to 2012, in fact, when I first started having one-to-one conversations specifically around impact, it was when we were sort of preparing for the ref. I recall really vividly working with two academics in the same unit of assessment. One was female and one was an older male academic. And that was my very first experience of working with a senior female academic and realizing that actually what they needed from me in the conversations that we were having was about often helping them to build their own confidence in the work that they were doing, and that work being impactful. And also, I think helping them and having conversations with them and discussions and listening as they sort of explained to me the system in which they were operating and how they needed to navigate that and the challenges that they were facing. And as I said at that time, I remember being quite surprised that the conversations that I was having was actually going way beyond the expectation I had had of what they would be. And actually those boundaries were quite wide. And what was coming into that was that whole person and the spaces in which they were in. I was also very surprised how vulnerable actually that individual was prepared to be with me. Somebody who sat outside of their institution, and probably for that very reason, as Katy said in her presentation, that actually being external, it is possible then to have conversations with an external coach or somebody you're having those who sits outside of those systems. There is less danger. You might be prepared to be more vulnerable with them. And I contrasted that with the conversations I was also at the same time having with the senior male academic, which were interesting because he didn't have, or at least was not prepared to express any vulnerabilities, but he was an extremely angry individual that time, because he didn't understand why the research that he had been doing for many years and which produced lots of fantastic 4-star papers, we were really struggling when it came to identifying what the impact may have been in terms of that sort of REF concept of change, research excellence framework concept of change that had just been introduced. And I think at that time, I put that difference in experience down to the fact that actually, for many people in 2012, the introduction of impact into the REF was actually fundamentally challenging their expectations of themselves, of what it meant to be an academic. And I kind of put it into that frame. And then I then moved into working in an institution as a university research impact manager, and started to see that same pattern repeated, actually. I found that when I was working with female researchers, that much of the conversations I had a very different quality than the conversations I was having often with their sort of male colleagues. And this was particularly I started to realize there was a particular question around sort of mid-career researchers, or female mid-career researchers. And the conversations with them had a slightly different quality. And from that, what I mean is using this term, exposing their vulnerabilities again, that they were far more open to exposing their vulnerabilities. And therefore, the conversations that we were having often delved into how they were feeling within the space of their department, questions and issues they had around their confidence with their research and the progress of their career. So sometimes, you know, and this was quite interesting with the women I spoke to who also had caring responsibilities outside of work, be that childcare or elder care. That and the pressure of that very much came up in the conversations that I was having in comparison to conversations around impact and research impact that I might be having with male colleagues who themselves might be at that same life stage. Now, that's not surprising. You know, we all know the difference in terms of the fact that women will still take on a lot of that sort of mental load and the sort of the organization within domestic households of the caring responsibilities. So maybe none of that should have been a surprise. But I suppose what it meant for me was that I had to really readjust the expectations of the conversations I was going to have. And I think take on board that realization that research impact really, because generating impact from research, even now, demands a level of unpaid labor, and this was something that Jackie and I started to have a conversation about when we met in earlier this year, and I've been reflecting on a lot since, that actually generating impact from research is something that takes time. You're playing the long game, and very often or not, more often than not, it also involves you putting in work that goes over and above. And actually, those mid-career researchers, particularly the female mid-career researchers that I was having experiences with, were really struggling with the demands of that. And that's where I think the challenges of mid-career, which we've identified as the pinch point, begins to intersect with identities around gender. That means that actually those experiences can be different for female academics as opposed to male academics. Now, I'm aware that that's a blanket statement, and it's not going to be the same experience for everybody by any means. But as I said, I'm basing this on you know, experiences gathered over the years rather than a sort of a deep scientific study I've done on the topic. And what I was seeing was that women were finding it challenging to sort of accommodate these different demands, and actually, you know, being a woman with caring responsibilities within this space. And even if you didn't have caring responsibilities, I would then often find myself having conversations where, you know, individuals were often maybe doubting their abilities in this space in a way that wasn't quite so common in some of the conversations I would have with their sort of fellow colleagues, male colleagues in particular. And then sort of moving this on a few years, what has happened and what I've noticed recently in the last couple of years particularly, has been a shift where I am now encountering more Black female researchers in the academic spaces in which I frequent, and this is a really positive change. You know, I've been in this space for long enough to know that it can be very lonely being an academic of colour, and actually finding it quite encouraging for myself on a personal level to now operate in spaces where there is more visible diversity of that nature. But what has come along with this has been an interesting phenomenon for me personally, where I have had female academics of the global majority, often of Black heritage, specifically seek me out to want to work with me. And again, this has sort of caught me a little bit by surprise. Again, mostly because, as I said, I don't necessarily see myself as a coach. I feel a lot of imposter syndrome when it comes to whether I have the ability to do that. But I've also felt an obligation actually to work with these women who are in mid-career and who are women of colour. And for myself, it has been quite an enlightening and quite a wonderful experience, actually. But it takes on then a deeper level of conversation that we're now having. One where we're discussing not just the challenges of being female mid-career researcher, but also being a person of colour in an academic space in the UK. And the conversations that we are then able to have are, we talk about microaggressions as the sort of the sense you may have of being overlooked or undermined in this space, and how you navigate some of the cultural differences. Because it's quite interesting that a number of the women I'm talking to are actually first generation immigrants into this country. So they're also coming from a different cultural upbringing and sort of understanding as well. Now, these are topics of conversations that, of course, I've never necessarily had before in this way in a one-to-one basis. And I suspect, but I don't know for sure, that actually these individuals would not necessarily have these conversations with colleagues who weren't from the global majority or may not be as open or as quick to have those conversations. And that got me thinking. And it was one of the reasons that I was interested in coming on this series to talk about this, was because I wondered a bit about what this phenomenon perhaps meant for those individuals. And so as part of preparing for this, I did, again, not in any way representative necessarily, but I belong to sort of quite a big network of Black heritage academics. And so I reached out to them and asked them about their experiences of coaching, which has been very, very interesting. I asked them about the experiences of coaching from the perspective of their gender. They were all women that responded, and also their experience of coaching, looking at through the lens of their ethnicity and really whether that mattered. So in terms of gender, that was really interesting, because that question, all of the attendees were very clear that being coached by someone of the same gender provided for them a more satisfying coaching experience, because, and I quote here, she understands my person as a woman. And they were able to relate on that level of gender, and they all stated, all six of them said that was really important. Now, in relation to ethnicity, that was a much more mixed response, actually. Which intrigued me. The response from, and I said it's a very small sample, the response from about half of the group was that actually their experience was that a good coach would be able to transcend issues of ethnicity. And actually, in one person stated that what really mattered was that individual's level of kindness and empathy, and then being able to bring that into the conversation. And also somebody said them having similar career goals or experiences, and these were people who were, I think, also being experiences of coaching was peer-to-peer coaching. But there were a couple within that group who felt that actually, an individual sharing their ethnicity was actually really beneficial in them being able to walk in their shoes, or to understand their situation, understand the types of challenges they were facing, not just within their career, but also personally, and back to that idea of sort of bringing the whole person into it. And I've sat a little while and thought about, that very small pot of findings, and I'll admit they did contradict what I half expected to find. I think I did expect to find a much greater enthusiasm for someone to be coached by somebody who was of the same ethnicity as them. The gender one, I wasn't necessarily that surprised by. The ethnicity, I was. But I think I found it reassuring. First of all, I found it reassuring that actually you had individuals who have had very positive coaching experiences, regardless really of who was coaching them. And ethnicity did not necessarily matter, which meant that actually those coaches were probably doing quite a good job. That they had done that they maybe had done some of the work that Jed was talking about before entering into those conversations, and were able to think about their own experiences and to be clear about the context in which they moved, and therefore were able to also apply some empathy to that. And I think for me, that's sort of one of the point that I have come to, thinking about working with the whole person, and specifically if you are in the position where you are coaching individuals who may be of a different gender to you, who may be of a different ethnicity, is about being able to, I think, ensuring that you, before you begin that coaching conversation, spend a bit of time reflecting on and maybe acknowledging your positionality, and maybe even, your own experiences of intersectionality. Intersectionality here, you tend to think of it as, race and gender all intertwining. We all, to a certain degree, have elements of that within our own life experiences. We have different identities, different people that we are. We are complex beings, and we bring a plethora of experiences to the table, and quite a wide range of identities. Looking into this a bit, there are models that you can use if you want to spend the time reflecting on that. There are things like social identity wheels that I came across recently that somebody was using, which are quite structured ways of doing that. But I would say that, just spending a bit of time with yourself and thinking about where you are coming from of your context, and how you might be able to take that, put it to one side, and then go into a coaching conversation with an individual who may be of a different ethnicity and a different gender, and allow your recognition that you don't understand everything about, or you are not able to comprehend everything about their experience. Actually use that as your platform from which to have those conversations, and to use that as your starting point for listening well and asking open questions, and giving them a safe space. I think it is possible to give people a safe space, even if they don't necessarily share the same life experiences as yourself. So sort of in conclusion, and I hope I've structured this in a way that sort of makes sense. I don't really want anyone to leave this thinking that they can't successfully coach someone with a different life experience, or a different gender, or a different skin color. I think it's more about acknowledging that if you are, as has come up very frequently in today's talks, developing that whole person, and actually having a conversation with an individual who is both having a career, a personal life, and they're bringing all of those complexities into that you need to recognize those different facets of who they are, because those different facets will make a difference to the experience that they have, in terms of the impact topic, and how they might approach that, and the challenges they may have in that space, and the difficulties they may have in finding help or understanding how, where those systems might be. So I think finally, I think my final point I would want to make is that, as a Black woman, I really enjoy working with and coaching other Black females, and I think there is a connection there. But if I reflect on myself and the people in my life who I would turn to for coaching, whether formal or informal, I have different people for different elements in different parts of what I do. And in fact, I have a white male who is a coach in my life, and I have a couple of females who are women of color. So you don't necessarily have to be everything to that person who is your coachee. They may have other there may be others sort of within their realm, within their networks that they will also call on. So don't beat yourself up in thinking that you absolutely have to be everything to that person. It's enough to, within the space in which you're operating, to acknowledge who they are and then provide what you can provide within the sort of the boundaries within which you are operating. And I think that brings me to the end of what I wanted to say, really, on that topic. And I'd be really happy to hear if anybody has any reflections on that, or happy to challenge me, and very different experiences. Because as I said, I've come at this very much from looking and reflecting back on experiences over a long time, acknowledging that it took me ages to realize I was even having coaching conversations, and actually the experience of coaching sort of women of Black heritage is quite a new one to me, and I'd be happy to hear from others in this space about their experiences as well.
Thank you so much, Saskia.